Hello and welcome back to the Marian University Thanatology program. I am Jill, your instructor once again, and today you folks are truly lucky to be hearing from Kammie Juzwin, who I have to say I met because she served on the same National Disaster Mortuary team as my spouse, working in the morgue during COVID in New York City. And if that wasn't an experience, I think for Kammie to come on board with that team, nothing ever could be. Kammie has the most experience I have ever seen for someone who works with a variety of first responders and last responders. And she continues to create amazing stuff to help people understand what it is that the people in those cultures are like and need and maybe don't know that they need. Anyway, we're going to talk, you're going to absorb, and she's got some amazing stuff. Kammie, can you tell them about yourself?
Sure. Is it okay if I put in the chat box my
Absolutely.
contact info?
Hmm.
So I'm putting my contact info in. Um, Whoops, hold on a second. I'm chatting as a guest. So my um, best email is info@kjuzwin.com. My encrypted voicemail and text is right there. My phone number is right there too. Um, so um, I am so honored to be asked to be here today. Big fan of the work that Jill does, and so excited to have this opportunity to interface with you guys in this. And the the I was joking with her that out of respect today, see if I can get it in the window.
There you go.
I'm wearing my team shirt from the Disaster Portable Morgue Unit 4 from New York, where I had the privilege of um, working uh, with your most beloved. And let me tell you, uh, probably saved my sanity having such a good connection with someone, and so I'm very grateful. Um, so I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm outside of Chicago, Illinois, and I have been primarily a hospitalist, and from well, I'm 189 this year, so I've lived a long time to do a lot of things. But I started in uh, well, I started in research and then moved to outpatient um, with high acute, highly suicidal, acute and complex patients. And uh, through there, became very exposed to trauma and the whole spectrum of trauma. And one of the things that I noticed, I don't know how this is for clinical social work education, but uh, was they only really talked in our curriculum about trauma associated with childhood, and that other bad things that happened were incidents associated that you might have grief with, but they really only taught us about trauma as it's associated with early childhood trauma. And yet, I worked in a small community based hospital, and a lot of times my director would call and say, "Hey, will you go up and talk to the ER staff because they had this really bad fatal, or they had this complicated, or they had a child death or something." And I realized that the trauma that they were talking about was so much different than the complex patients who I was treating, and became just really felt like I had found my area of deep
You found
interest.
your people and your niche.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and uh, about the time a colleague of mine was a member of the Northern Illinois Critical Incident Stress Management Team. And if you're interested, uh, we have a great website, ni-csi.org. CISM.org. It's either hyphen or underscore, but we're a member of the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. Add the M, there's an M,
Ah,
NICISM. And the other organization, the overriding, English is very hard sometimes, would be ICISSF.org. And I wanted so badly to become a member of that team. So this was the late 80s, early 90s. And I was told until you are fully licensed, you can't, if you're mental health, you can't be on the team. And I hadn't yet finished my doctorate. I had my master's, but not my master's license. Illinois was changing about that time. And uh, so the NICISM team, um, their very first call out was the Lori Dan school shooting. And ironically, the same first call as the regional SWAT team. So there was a lot that happened about 1987. So when I finally got on this team, which was right after 9/11 happened, um, I've been an active member of that team and have loved it. From their coordinated debriefings, it's volunteer, so you don't get paid. And one thing that I can tell you that I find really interesting is the number of individuals who want to work with first responders and want to work with trauma in the first responder and mass disaster and incident world do not want to volunteer.
no, they want to get paid.
They want to get paid. Now, ironically, kind of a sidebar, if I can, for a moment, part of that is I get it. You're using a skill set, and okay. But the other issue is that the way that state licensure laws are written, that we can't do anything that involves, there's a conflict of if I am somewhere on the basis of because I have a license, I have to assume that I am there as a licensed mental health provider and therefore have to function under my licensing act, which is terrible, which is a terrible double bind
Right.
because I'm not taking names, I'm not doing documentation, I'm not doing assessment, I am not uh, developing doctor-patient
You're not doing
relationships.
a quick case plan.
No. And
Mm-mm.
so right now that is becoming a huge issue at the state Supreme Court in Massachusetts. So my next big project is to really try to address what has become an acceptable non-traditional application of mental health support
Mm-hmm.
services being offered, and critical incident stress management definitely falls under that because it's very clear this is not therapy.
No, it's not.
So, and where that issue is becoming so important is that the peers in CISM are protected under the Peer Support Act. Mental health are not. So we can be compelled to give testimony. And,
It leaves you out there
yeah.
dangling.
And
Mm-hmm.
so the reality is that I never learn anybody's names. My job is to keep it from becoming therapy and to provide education. So I don't want to have to go through the hassle of going to court, but it would sure be nice if we had the same sort of protections. But
Absolutely would be. It's a necessity.
yeah, but if I were being paid, it means then that we have a business agreement and I am the licensed clinical professional. So
You're really in a bind. Yeah, because then
yeah,
you have to do the notes and all the other. Yeah.
yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can tell you, I love doing critical incident debriefing. It probably has been for me um, one of the most useful um, forums for me to develop relationships within that culture, but also to sit with people again, sort of secondhand, um, about what their experiencing is and what is normal, and to understand their language, you know, and uh, so, and I've met some really incredible people. One of whom was uh, the chief who ultimately hired me at the department where I'm embedded. So, I'm very, very fortunate with that. But through the critical incident team after Katrina, I joined the Illinois 2 team, which was the mental health support team, which eventually got rolled into the federal DMORT, the VIC team. And so um, let me explain it for those people who may not know what that is. So
Thank
through
you. My
the,
dog won't stop barking, so I'm trying to not let her feed through here.
oh no, I'm not hearing anything, so don't worry. Um, so if you are really interested in working in disaster or with disaster personnel, you probably should look at the FEMA um, coursework for NIMS, and especially the 700, 800, um, and I think there's a 100 and 200 as well, and they're all free. But also psychological first aid, um, and one of the best ones is National Child's Traumatic Stress Network, and all of those are free. Um, all of those are free, and I can tell you for that the NIMS classes that when you go online, you have to register for an account. It's not going to cost you anything, but download the test and read the materials for the content that goes with the test. And why those are important is that um, this is the boring history part. Sorry. Um, if you have insomnia, call me. I'll walk you through this and I'll put you right to sleep. So after Katrina, one of the things after Katrina and Rita that was discovered was that we didn't have an integrated plan across the country to bring in responders in a mass incident and click them together. And this had been noticed in New York, but I think because of the action imperative that happened in New York City, that the country went on high alert and into protection in terrorism, both domestic and abroad, and started to address a lot of these issues. But Katrina really brought it home that we didn't have a unified way of snapping together different teams from across not only the country but across the world in like Legos so that they could support one another. And so if you're going to work with first responders at all, you need to understand the principles that come with um, the um, the 700 and 800 principles of things like span of control, the hierarchies that happen on a response thing, and then psychological first aid for the mental health, or any of the supporting people, chaplains included here, of course, is that in a disaster situation, first and foremost, for about the first 3 to 6 months, it's all going to be um, stabilizing and resourcing, stabilizing and resourcing. And one of the things that we have to get used to not being in um, uh, in the criminal justice world is the difference between what is a victim. I'm sorry, yeah, the definition of what is a victim versus survivor.
Mm.
And why that is so important is that if there is a criminal aspect that something has happened, the Office of Victims of Crime, OVC, comes in and they work closely with criminal justice in making sure that that individual who was a victim of a crime. Now, I know most mental health people are going like, what? They survived something
We don't
terrible.
like victim language,
Yeah.
but you need it this is a technical term in this sense.
Yes. Yeah. And it gets them access to resources. It gets them
Mm.
access to funds, and it gets them accesses to supports through the legal system and even into uh, recovered monies and funds. So, we discovered this in, for example, here in my area, coming on 2 years now in Highland Park,
Right.
that the Office of Victims of Crime worked very closely with the FBI because it wasn't known right away um, if this was terrorism. So of course that the FBI came as support, and then the OVC came as they understood how many people, just the span of trauma that had happened to people. Well, when the mental health people came rushing in, one of the problems was they got stuck on this language and
Mm-hmm.
they didn't understand that many people who were giving their footage as evidence for the criminal prosecution had also been contacted uh, from the OVC and the who was working with them to also get their statements as victims, as witnesses of crime. And what happened was the mental health people really took offense to that. And they said, number one, you're not a victim, so you don't need to go there,
Oh
thereby
no.
circumventing them following up and having interviews and conversation with resources that would have, and many of these people couldn't go to their jobs, they couldn't go into some of the houses, et cetera, and so on. And so, and then many of them also struggled with not being documented. So the mental health people said, you're a survivor. If you go and you talk to law enforcement, they're going to deport you. And so law enforcement didn't even get to say, we don't even care about that. That's not why we're here. We're here because a crime happened and we need to get number one, the evidentiary, and we need to take care of the victims of this crime. So uh,
And
if
if
you're,
you're a victim of crime and you're undocumented, that opens access to actually a waiver to allow for a path to citizenship for
yes,
that matter. So
yeah,
it would have behooved them.
right,
Yeah.
right. And so our mental health people who responded, I'm not going to say that it was 100% of them, but having been to so many of I always make an attempt to go to the tactical debriefings
Mm-hmm.
and the hot washes whenever I can, but these were some of the issues that came up. The second is that mental health people with good intentions often show up thinking that they're going to do therapy. And the
That's not
reality is,
what's needed.
yeah, it's not what is needed there. And so, in many ways, I think our chaplains actually have such a great training for this, which is to um, deliver supportive intervention
Mm-hmm.
for containment and support, and then what resources may be available. So, when um, again, when the Highland Park situation happened, mental health people on all of the Chicago kind of Facebook pages were like, we need to go up there and support. And I said, whoa, whoa, slow your roll. Number one, this is an active crime scene, and we don't even know where the perimeter is yet. And then the second, and so you don't want to cross into a crime scene when they also didn't know where the perpetrator or perpetrators were, and
Right.
were there subsequent secondary and tertiary sites, as we know has
Like
happened.
Boston as well.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. And then secondly, and people were posting like, I'm a diagnostician, I'll go up and I'll assess if there's trauma. Well, I already know the answer to that. Yes, there was a traumatic event that they were involved with, so now's not the time to go test. Um,
They ran
let's
for
not
their
do that.
lives. Let's just admit that we have
Yeah.
trauma. Yeah.
And so the what you need to understand is um, the psych first aid components for um, what people are going to be asking you to do. And if you're dealing with victims and survivors in the aftermath, is really psych first aid. And uh, yeah, and it keeps it contained, and it keeps it, timing and pacing of interventions is everything. And it keeps you right in line with the appropriate timing and pacing. Um, and then if you're interested, get the basic training through the Critical Incident Stress Foundation, and so that you have an understanding of what the range of specific application is for the responders. And and so our team was there. And number one, other number one point, I have lots of number one points, is you never go unless you're invited.
No.
And because, if you get in your car and you show up, you're unvetted, and then you become a liability that the infrastructure has to absorb and keep you safe and contained. So you may have great intentions, but again,
You're in the way.
yeah. Well, when you think about the shooting in the school shooting in DeKalb 15 years ago now,
Hmm.
there are two major roads out that way because you're way out in the country. There's two major north-south routes. One is an interstate highway, and then the route that runs through town, and then one is an east-west um, that runs out there. Well, every parent got in their car and drove out there, understandably, because they were terrified. But so did every news agency and so many mental health people. And so now a town of, I'm just guessing, 30,000 bloomed up to almost 90,000. I know I'm estimating, but I know it tripled in its size
Pure
within a matter of
chaos.
24 hours.
Yeah.
And so you didn't have anywhere to put the families who needed to be there and a place to have the kids go
Contained.
to. Yeah. So and in that situation, they knew exactly where the perpetrator of the event was, so they knew where their perimeter was. For something like Boston, how big is the perimeter? They didn't
That
know that.
perimeter was huge. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to, I'll tell you, if you want to see a great film that really highlights some of what we're talking about, um, there's a movie that I believe it's called The Patriot, with Mark Wahlberg. He plays a Boston invest detective, and it's basically um, follows this case, and uh, it shows all of the work that they have to do, and for and the toll that it takes on them, but what they're attempting to do for the victims of the situation. And it will highlight, I hope, everything that we're sort of talking about today. But so the DMORT team. So let me come back. So NIMS from FEMA, which it works, as we know, is a federal agency. Um, the tree, the whatever you call it, the organizational chart is pretty complicated. But when you look at um, the response in our nation, it falls under Health and Human Services. So, and all of the organizations that fall under there, FEMA is one of them, OSHA is another one. Then you have the Office of Emergency Management, and then it comes down to the uh, uh, the Department of Public Health is in there somewhere, and the Department of Health and Human Services is in there, and you eventually get to the Disaster Medical Assistance Teams, DMAT, and DMAT are the strike teams that go, a part of the strike teams that actually go in ahead of bringing in any resources, and they're the ones who assess what is needed and how severe is the event. And they're typically made up of, I want to say, somewhere between 5 and 10 people, depending on where it is. So for the the Hawaii fire, there was a
Mm-hmm.
team that went there, and their jobs are to assess the scope of the disaster,
And
to
what's
get an
needed.
idea, yeah, to what is needed in regards to the survivors, to any of the victims, the deceased, agriculture, the animals. So we're
Because
talking
there's DVET.
the DVETs, yep,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of the logistics to support not only what is there, but how do we support all of the people that we're bringing in? So
And how do we recreate what's no longer there?
right, and so this is why you see many affiliations, such as the Red Cross, which is, they work in disaster response with delivery of services for survivors in the community. Then you have the Salvation Army, which holy cow, what Salvation Army provides, I can't even go into the scope. It's such a remarkable what they show up with. The food kitchen. I know we have the World Food Kitchen, who is another one that is a
You had
smaller
them there.
private,
They were in Hawaii too. Mm-hmm.
and then the Green Cross of
Mm-hmm.
traumatology. So this is a great one if you want to be a vetted traumatology. Check them out. Green Cross of Traumatology, of I forgot of in there, but it's a great organization that handles spontaneous volunteers. Now, most local municipal agencies are no longer allowing for spontaneous mental health volunteers to come do mental health work, because of some of the court stuff that I just talked about, but also because of they don't know who they are.
Right.
They don't know who they are. So, so the disaster medical team um, provides medical response, and they provide additional support in medical settings where there is a surge that happens, and they provide the surge capacity uptake. Now, I do want to say one thing about these organizations. Very few of them are actually full-time employees. And
Almost none. Mm-hmm.
as a matter of fact, most Americans have this belief that somewhere um, there's a vet waiting to take care of my animal, if something happens. So 9/11 is a great example. When they had to bring all of the airplanes into the closest airport, there were tens of thousands of animals en route. So there's no way the United States government can afford to, or really needs to, have 10,000 vets sitting around the country going like, gosh, I hope I get an animal that comes in today. No, what they do is they uh, uh, hire they're like Stacy and I are both permanent, part-time, intermittent employees for the government. And every month we roster with the government to say, am I available for the next 30 days? Um, and um,
And there are
so,
multiple teams across the country by geography
yep, by
for
region.
each of by region for
Mhm.
each of the categories.
Right,
And everyone is just on 24-hour call,
right.
and you have
So,
to be ready to go in hours.
right, right. And so, probably like at your house, my husband built me a cabinet, and
Mm-hmm.
it has all of my stuff there available. And depending on how remote it is, um, like for IMERT, which is the state field hospital that I'm mental health coordinator for, um, my go kit, we have to be I'm a, we have to be self-sufficient for 48 hours. So I also have a tent and a sleeping bag and some accoutrements. Whereas for most of us on DMORT and DMAT, most of us are in a hotel, a dormitory, or we're in a large tent dormitory community. So
Or what's
um,
left of a hotel sometimes.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but so we're not all sitting around just waiting for something. So if you're interested in looking, I think it's at usajobs.gov website, and what you want to look at is, look at DMAT, look at DMORT. Trying to think what of some of the other teams. I'm on the victim information center that's associated with DMART. So uh, they don't hire that often.
Mm-mm. And it's a
Now,
long process.
oh, mine was like 2 or 3 years. Um,
Absolutely.
and you know what? Photocopy, download everything,
And send
everything,
everything twice.
everything. Yep. And for DMAT, they actually have mental health roles who are assigned to take care of the DMAT people, and they're embedded in the team, and their role is to support the DMAT and the strike teams. I'm sorry, the DMAT, the mortuary team, the DMORT. We are not. I'm on there because I'm behavioral health, but my job is not to take care of the team members. My job is there to interview family members. Oh, and if while I'm doing my other job, someone on the team needs my support, then as long as it doesn't interfere with my job, I can go talk to them and offer them support. Now, I hope you noticed a little bit of bitterness and sarcasm in that voice, because the morgue was appalling, was absolutely appalling. I'm sure you heard about it in your home. And
Hmm.
I had an afternoon where I got on my very own last nerve, and I can imagine. And Stacy was my partner. I'm pretty sure I got on her very last nerve too. She was so great, but
She uses humor to cope.
yeah,
Hmm.
and there were a couple of hours where in spots where we were both so angry, and I don't want to speak for her, so there was
No.
so much. I felt so disrespected,
Hmm.
and uh so much disregard, and in attempting to resolve some of the conflictual situations that were coming up. When we talked to our leader, we were told, listen, I don't deal with any of that. My leadership assignment is just for the task. I don't care about any of this other bullshit. So figure it out. And I know I'm answering your question by going like
No,
this.
it's
So
but
I'm
it's I think it's really giving everyone a sense of what it's like to be out in a disaster. And
yeah,
it's very true. The mortician team, which in COVID was huge and spread very thin,
yep,
and nobody even knew what COVID could do at that point. They were getting
right,
information as it came to,
right, right.
right? They were out there on their own when she went to Puerto Rico, which was horrific,
Yeah.
um, there was some kind of get back to Atlanta, and there was a debriefing of some sort, but like many hard disaster teams, particularly the DMORT team, they don't take well to outsiders and to therapists, even if they're married to one or best
Yep.
friends with one.
Yep.
They cope within their own.
Right. Right.
And those are the ones that if you folks are considering doing thanatology in this area, it's a very, very fine line you walk to try and provide support without assuming you know what they're dealing with, because
Right.
they've been doing this for a while and they've faced a lot.
And to add to that point is that in the field, I have to make sure that their head stays in the game.
Right.
So, like in my office, like if you were talking to me, I was a client in your office and you were saying, "Hey, Kammie, let's talk about this." And at some point, you might say, "Do you notice how your body wants to cry, but you're not, you know, what do you think
Mm-hmm.
that's about?" Like we would have that conversation in a therapist office, and I would probably say, "Yeah, I can feel them coming up, but um, what good is it going to do?" Right? That was
Right.
4 years ago, right? And then we would have the conversation, and eventually I would get to that place where I might shed a few tears or get a little misty about it, and then some of the healing in the process would be. That'd be awesome. I can't do that in the field,
Mm-mm.
and I don't want to do that in the field. And especially where you have a high risk and a potentially dangerous circumstance, you don't want their head out of the game for even a moment. So this is sort of the draw sometimes. And at the same time, um, for the spiritual piece, you have to be totally, and I know that our chaplains here really understand this. I cannot for a moment impose any sort of personal value about why I believe God let this happen, or why would God do this, or any of those thousands of statements that all of us have heard in dealing with the life and death process, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Uh, and
And
it
especially in a mass disaster site,
mhm,
whether it's a Katrina or Puerto Rico or Maui,
right,
which my wife personally said is worse than any of the ones she's ever faced before.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And you have to, as a supporter, be able to hear the really raw humor
yep,
that all these team members use to cope,
hmm,
and understand the personalities, because you have not only, for instance, on DMORT, you have the morticians, the dental team, the genetics team, you have
anthropologists,
anthropologies, you've got all those people. In
the death
DMAT, you've got,
investigators,
yeah, you in DMAT, you've got nurses and doctors and and therapists of various sorts. For every one of those groups has their own personality as well.
hmm,
Right. Speaking as a social worker, we have our own personality and twisted sense of
yep,
humor.
yep,
Right. And in hospice, we had that. So you're dealing when you are Kammie dealing in this environment, you have multiple layers of folks with multiple layers of needs trying to cope.
right. And I, I guess there's no sugarcoating. I don't want to sugarcoat
No,
anything for
don't.
anybody. Not everybody is psychologically healthy.
Right.
And I think that Stacy probably shared some of our shared,
Yes.
um, and you have people who are um, sneaking off to go gamble every night. You have
Mm.
cliques that form. You have hookups that are happening, and not just hookups that are happening at night. You have people disappearing from the scene.
From the line.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, uh, it's it, you have to deal with not having resources. I mean, um, So I have a very dear friend, and if you ever wanted to interview him, he is absolutely amazing. His name is Michael Fagel, Michael J. Fagel, PhD, and he's with Aurora Safety. And he was one of the first people I met at on the critical incident team because when I went for my critical incident training, it was October 4th and 5th, 2001.
Holy
And
cow.
we were I am so sorry to your group. I'm like going like this, but it all does tie together.
Hmm.
Um, so we were sitting in the lecture hall at Loyola Hospital in Chicago, and we're in a hospital, my mothership, right? So I'm pretty comfortable getting people to where they need to go in hospitals and recognizing when people are lost. And I kept looking out in this hallway, and I saw this man pacing out in the hallway. And actually, he was sort of shuffling and he was sort of hunched over. And I thought, I know that the only thing down the end of the hall is the morgue, and he's not walking himself down there, I'm pretty sure. And so, we're doing the training. And then um, I said to my friend who was with me, I am very concerned about this gentleman in the hallway. And I think I'm going to go out and get him back to his unit or to find out somebody to help him out because I don't know if he has dementia or what is happening, but there there's something not right. And so as I was getting ready to go, they said, so we want to introduce you to one of our group members who has been out at New York. He's an incident commander in the Bronx. And he's going to talk to you about where he's been for the last 3 weeks. And they go out in the hallway and they bring in my dementia man. And I went, oh dear God, please, no, do not do this to him. And so they say, hey, Mike, you want to tell us who you are? And he goes, well, my name is Mike Fagel. And like that was all he could get out. And okay, so where have you been, Mike? And he goes, well, for the last 3 weeks, I've been on the good ship Comfort, and I've incident commander in the lower Bronx or something like that. And and he just sort of stood there and said, so who do you work for, Mike? And he goes, well, is today the 4th or the 5th? And at that point, I'm like, you need to stop. You guys need to stop. This individual is, and I go, no, today's October 5th. And he goes, oh, thank God. And so everybody's like, why? And he goes, oh, because I work for OSHA today, as of today. I used to work for FEMA, and now I work for OSHA. Today, I started at OSHA. Do you know what FEMA's logo, not logo, saying is? It's not a disaster until we get there. And like he starts laughing. And like I started laughing because that's funny, right? And then like you could just see how traumatized that he was. And so Mike
Hmm.
and I now are like best of friends. We talk all of the time. And our biggest joke is that he's been at every national disaster and terrorism incident since Oklahoma bombing. He onboarded into FEMA on uh, on the aircraft going to Oak Bomb. And so my joke with him is, Mike, do you notice that every disaster since Oklahoma bombing has one common thread, and that's you? I'm just saying.
Point an investigator's going to
Uh,
need to
yeah,
ask.
yeah. Somebody somewhere is going to ask me that, and I just have to point that out. But Mike, I've done a lot of writing with Mike. If you go on his website, you'll see his books, and I have a couple of chapters in them in disaster management. The guy is one of the best in the world. And so he called me when I was in New York, and he said, "Will you do a chapter for me?" And I said, "Okay." And he said, because I had been doing journal entries and then sending journal entries to some of my friends to let them know I was okay. And Mike Mike said, Mike, one of his comments was, I think I have some, I think there's a friend in the hallway with me at the morgue now. And I went, no, I'm fine. And as you probably heard from Stacy, I probably was not fine. No, I was fine. I was impacted, and I think that that's a really important thing
Yes.
to say. We were resilient, we were
Mm-hmm.
exhausted, and we were impacted. Um, uh, just as a point of information, Stacy and I, Stacy's a little bit younger than I am. As I said, I'm 189. This was 4 years ago, and we were assigned on the platform. And
Mm-hmm.
what that meant is, and I can show photos if you want me to. The platforms, there were 18 doors that semis were backed into, and each of the semis had upwards of 38 to 40 deceased on them, refrigerated. And then there were probably 60 in the yard, and then 18 over on the freezer dock
Mm-hmm.
that were going into long-term storage. And our role was to identify the identify a body for transport, either placing them or picking them up for either for burial or recovery. And so we were sort of fortunate in that we didn't have to have eyes on the actual deceased. They were all in bags, but we did have to rebag a number of them, and there were so many of them. And I think on our busiest day, we did 145 transfers working with the National Guard. Okay, now I'm 185 on my feet from the moment we got there to the moment we left. And our shifts were 12 hours on that fucking dock.
With
I
no
like
days off
no days off, no days off, and an hour transport each way.
each way.
Um, we had one meal provided for us, and New York City was shut down. And so the closest place that we could go for a meal was a deli that was about 2.5 blocks down. And most of the days I was so tired and hungry and sore, I couldn't do the walk. So I did, that was the first time I ever did Uber. And I figured, I looked for all of the small businesses trying to order
Mm-hmm.
food. And they didn't, and we left before breakfast. So, you'd order enough food to have for breakfast and for dinner. And yeah, it was awful. But Mike had said, I want you to write me a chapter, and I did. And, and then he sent it back to me and he goes, this is a great chapter. I love it. It was about 50 pages, and we have to get them down to about 12. And he said, we got to clean up the title a little because it's wordy. And the title of the chapter was Mental Health Needs a Seat at the Fucking Table, You Assholes. And he goes, we're just gonna have to clean it up a bit. It's provocative, but I love it. But so it's something like take care of your mental health, people, something like that now.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, in it, I wrote about um, there were no chairs up on the platform. I'm sure
Right.
you've heard the
You
story.
can't sit.
And so the National Guard built a bench that would sit the four of them. And then the rest of the time, we were sitting on the gurneys.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
As you
and
showed the deceased. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so I took to scrubbing everything. And of course, the documentation was all done by paper. And so, with post-it notes, etc. And so on. It wasn't until maybe day 11 that the coroner started doing their team online using a computer and a printer. We had to do everything by hand. And so it was, you got the sticky note with the number uh, and where they were. Um, you had to go then with your National Guard team to the trailer to help move them, bring them back in, and then close the loop by uh, you have a log in, you have the paper log at the truck. So you're writing this identification number 5 or 6 times. Plus, if you have a multiple team, you're writing it down and giving it out and then taking the papers back in. Which is pain in the so totally like I get each of the points because you can't mix up the bodies.
At all.
And
And you
so,
have to know where they are at all times.
yep. So Stacy and I were up there doing that, and every now and then it would be a little bit of a lag, and we wanted a place to sit down, so we were stealing chairs. The worst part was, and for you guys, if you want to understand the power of this, it's so simple and it sounds so stupid, but let me tell you, there were days that I at one day nearly OD'd on the blue is that naproxen, the you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I ended up in the medical tent, and they can't treat me. They take my
No.
blood pressure and my temperature, but they can't treat me. And here I am. I think I overdosed. I couldn't move. I couldn't move, and I was so sick. Um, but every time somebody would walk by, the logistics, the safety person, or the fire department, or the coroner, I would say, "We need chairs." Oh,
Mm-hmm.
you know what? FD has 200 chairs right there. See that door with the lock on it? We can get you chairs. We have over 200 chairs right here with us. We were anticipating that.
Well, where are they?
That was what I said at least three
Mm-hmm.
times a day. And then I was told I was being aggressive
Mm-hmm.
and antagonistic. Um, so at that point, the National Guards, were really generous. We would walk by, they would get up from the bench and they'd move over to a gurney. And but one day they were doodling all over, and so the National Guard got pissed off at them, came in, painted the entire platform white, except for what I wrote. I, we were having fun doing lighthearted, nothing gross, nothing. And
Right.
so we were with the Army National Guard. And so all over the platform, I wrote, "Go Army, beat Navy." That didn't get painted over. One of them did this beautiful mandala that did not
Mm-hmm.
get painted over. And then I also wrote a few uh, sayings from our field, which were, "And the Lord said, who will go?" And I said, "Lord, send me."
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, and things like that. So uh never got our chairs. Never got our chairs. Um uh Women dressed in full PPEs. It takes about 40 minutes to get to doff. Um, because what did we wear? We wore our most of us wore a t-shirt,
Mm-hmm.
like a wind shirt underneath, like a long sleeve shirt underneath, than our duty shirt. Um, we were the only ones who were in a non-climate controlled tent. So, you know, and then you had your BDUs on. Then you had uh, the PPE suit
The Tyvek. Yeah.
with the Tyvek. Um, for a long time, we had the surgical caps, and then we went to hairnets with the Tyvek over, and then your first pair of gloves was taped to your long sleeve shirt. Your second pair of gloves, then you put your Tyvek on, and then your third pair of gloves up over. And it takes 45 minutes to try to go to the bathroom if you're a
Yes.
female.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if Stacy ever got yelled at. I did, that I was taking too long in the bathroom because I was trying to go over to the portable one that actually had running water so that I could wash as well.
Yeah,
And
I think
that
she got it a couple times. She doesn't tend to talk about the things like that, but yeah, there was that.
And then so they told us that our shift leader told us that we were to use the ones on the side. and with the pump water. I did not want to use the latrine to have to strip out that many clothes and not touch anything.
It's
But what was
impossible.
fascinating, and so next time I'm deployed with Stacy, I'm going to have to ask her this. I'm going to take up smoking. I'm going to take up smoking. Now, I don't know how to do it, but I'll walk around looking really cool because they're out there 40 minutes every other hour.
And the funny thing is, she smokes, but she smokes so fast. But what she found in Maui was she was the only one who said she was smoking, but 60% of the team did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she's fastidious about taking care of things and not leaving a trail. But other
Yep.
people weren't, so she was the targeted person for anything that was left behind.
Yep.
But yeah,
So, yeah, so it was,
I hope that people listening are really hearing just how much is involved in being a responder who's considered first but also last responder because you're taking care of the deceased and then interfacing with everybody in the community who's trying to get their deceased loved ones back,
right.
and all the politicians who are involved in whatever part of this, because there's always a political part to
Yep.
this.
Yep.
And then there's always news organizations with their drones trying to
Yep.
get images that you're not allowed to be in,
Right. Absolutely. Um,
which
and
adds more stress.
so, okay. So one of my supervisors is crossing behind. So, um, my cat. Uh, so, uh, the hard part was in the morning when we met, you always do a briefing
Mhm.
on these mass teams. Here was what we were told about mental health. Mental health is a liability.
What?
There's your lecture. That was the lecture. And in the evening, um, a check just there was no formal turnover amongst most of us. So if you are a mental health person, at the end of shift, there should be a goodbye, good work, how y'all doing? And everybody's going to say fine, and they're going to roll their eyes at you. But nonetheless, um, actually at the retreat that I do, I show a picture from my first deployment, which was Travis Air Force Base. I was there for 6 or 8 weeks in February and March of
COVID.
2020 during
No,
for
no, yeah.
COVID
Yeah.
for the Wuhan, China, and then the
Hmm.
Diamond Princess repatriation.
Yeah, Stacy
Um,
was there for part of that as well.
yeah, I think she was there at
She
the
started in San Diego and then got to Travis.
yeah. So I think she was at Travis prior to. She must have done primarily Wuhan, the
Hmm.
Wuhan group, because I did primarily the Diamond Princess. We only overlap. I mean, yeah, we only overlapped for maybe 4 days,
Right.
but that was such a so much more of a really lovely deployment because number one, everyone was alive, so that was great. Um, although what was difficult was you would go to do rounds on your people, and sometimes you'd hear that they had been hospitalized overnight,
Hmm.
you know. Um, and then, but every night in the morning and in the evening, we would have our check in and our check out. We did get an afternoon off as a team, and which was great. Um, excuse me, but we um, we had such community support, and we had several hours off during the day. Here we didn't. At the end of the day in New York, we just went back to our rooms.
Hmm.
And many of us who are clinicians tried to see our clients at night, which was absolutely stupid.
You don't have that much left of you.
No. And so
Yeah.
um, that was something. Whereas at Travis, it wasn't hard because I could come back and I could sleep for a couple of hours. The hotel had restaurant and some of us would meet together and we would eat, and then I'd see and we're also on the West Coast, so I could see my clients, at Central Standard Time. So there's a lot to think about. And one thing I can tell you, bring a pair of clothes and a pair of shoes in a plastic bag, including personal private stuff, in a plastic bag, and have a big bag so that when you go home with all of your dirty stuff, that it's already in a bag separate. And you might want to let that air out in your backyard for a little while before you bring it into the house, because you don't know what you're bringing in.
We threw away the boots in Puerto Rico.
I left my boots in New York. I left my boots there. I also don't like traveling in uniform. I do not like it at all. People don't know what your patches are. They just see you in uniform and patches. And can I buy you this? They were very, very generous. But at the same time, it's like, I'm not military. I'm not a U.S. military person. And I'm grateful that you're grateful for the service. But I need to let you know, like, I am a representative of the United States government today, but I'm not a military worker. And they were just so, and then some of the hostility on the plane coming back. We were told not to travel in our BDUs. We were traveling in civies, yeah. And this man sat down next to me and he goes, "Oh, you're one of those." It was right before we went into full
lockdown.
This coming back from California. And you're one of those. I was coming back from the morgue. I don't believe in this virus, blah, 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 blah. And he goes on and on. So you don't see me running from a little virus. And he goes, and he just went on. And I said, "Sir, I respect you, but I'm not wearing this mask because I'm afraid of a virus. Of afraid of catching anything. You don't know where I've been for the last 2 weeks, and I'm worried about sharing something with you." And then he got a little pale and asked for a seat change. And I was like, "That's probably a good idea, sir."
Mm-hmm. While you're not afraid.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah. So my whole career has sort of led me to this, to doing that in 2020. But since 2012, I've been an embedded police psychologist with the Bartlett, Illinois Police Department. And you know what? For your people who might be interested, check out this Society for Police and Criminal Psychology. And this is where most of us hang out. Um, and I think that, going back to our point earlier about the who are on all of these disaster and federal teams, it's people in your community who are firefighters, who are nurses, who are uh, morticians, who are funeral directors, who are crime scene investigators, um, uh, the paramedics. There are lots of roles, and you remember that this is part of what you'd learn in the FEMA online classes, which is all reading. It's not webinars, but reading, is that every disaster starts local. And this is something that most Americans don't understand, is that if something terrible happened, let me use Highland Park. When the Highland Park situation happened, the FBI doesn't come in and go like, "Hey, we're in charge," unlike television. Okay.
Right.
The incident commander is the highest ranking public service official there. And they retain control of all aspects of the disaster, until they, until or unless they hand it off to a designate. Mm-hmm. So, like, the mayor of Highland Park was in charge of everything, just like the mayor in New Orleans was in charge of everything. And they get ultimate control of what and who comes into their community and how they handle it. So the Highland Park public safety people and their negotiated contracts for services, their hospital providers, their ambulance providers, their fire and rescue rigs and things, that's all contracted, and that's all part of their emergency planning plan. And then their multiple agency response contracts go out like this, so that they can call, like you probably have heard this, on the news, like it was a 4-alarm box fire, meaning 4 different agencies were called in to respond.
Mm-hmm.
When those 4 agencies leave their area to come in, other areas come in and cover, so that there's backfill all the way to Nebraska.
Mm-hmm. And the
So,
federal teams can't show up until there is a presidential disaster
right,
declaration.
right,
There's no help from the feds until they are requested.
right. So, many of us, you probably have this happen in your home, we're monitoring hurricanes, you know.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, they just came out with the predictions, and we watched it last night.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And like on my weather app, I have like, where are the forest fires,
Mm-hmm.
where is this, that, and the other, and and the like. So
And when COVID was just starting, there was chatter that I know you got at the federal level on the back channels that wasn't anywhere on the news.
mhm,
And Stacy's not allowed to share with me what she's seeing, but she was able to say, we need to shut down your office right now. I know other people don't believe this is real, but I got to get my uniforms pressed and I got to change the patches again. And we got to
yep,
shut down the office because you're coming home.
yep, yep,
And I couldn't say anything to anyone, but I followed directions. And sure enough, we were.
right,
So there's a lot of information that people on these teams are hearing that they can't share anywhere.
right. And that actually is so stressful.
It
Is
is.
so stressful. Um, it's so interesting. And as you know, both you and Stacy have an open invite anytime to come to our retreats. So um, I promised when I left the organization that I left last that I was never going to go back to a hospital. I said, never again. I don't like what healthcare has become. I'm sure many of you who are listening to this can go like, vote, let's vote Chicago style,
Right?
Um,
All in.
and so I had met another alumni from Adler like 3 years prior. So this must have been 2019, maybe. And, I did the polite thing. So, number one diplomatic rule, never make enemies in this field. Number two, know that you're going to come across people and at least leave respectful, positive footsteps. So now we're in 2021 and I get a call from this person. And after I first met him, I had sent him a LinkedIn and I had said, hey, it was great to meet you. So impressed with work you're doing, blah, blah. So he calls me and he goes down in history as the best negotiator I have ever worked with. And he said, I need a clinical supervisor at Haymarket Center of Chicago. And we're not hanging up until I get a yes. And I said, so I knew Haymarket. It's a not-for-profit substance abuse rehab treatment center uh, started by Father McDermott, who's just this incredible presence in Illinois for the underserved and underprivileged. And so I said, well, that's nice. You need a supervisor. Where are you located? Because I'm all about pragmatics, right? Where am I going to have to drive? And he said in the West Loop. And I said, it's been really great talking to you. No. And he says, you don't have to come down. You only have to come down 3 days a week. And I said, absolutely not. And he goes, how about one day? Because I need you to have a presence here one day a week. And I said, are you going to give me I need a parking place. And he goes, done and done. And then he said the salary, and I about fell off my chair. Never working in a hospital full time had I ever seen that salary. And I was like,
Wow.
oh man,
Can't
double
say no to
bind.
that one.
And so I said, so here's my last one. I've been wanting to do a retreat for first responders and essential personnel. I had a place twice now that we almost bought. I had a backer, um, incredible, incredibly generous benefactor who would have helped me and helped me with the property and the business until Illinois decided to pass the Safe T Act, which basically said if you're a first responder, we hate your guts. And if you're law enforcement, we hope that you shrivel up and die and that you die badly. So I just summed that whole law for you. Um, and it was passed within 6 hours of it coming out. No time for public review, and it has been
Wow.
disastrous for Illinois. And my benefactor supporter at that point said, "We love your cause, love your cause. We can't support putting money into a state that hates and does not support its first responders. So let's look at Iowa, let's look at Wisconsin, let's look at Indiana, let's look at Michigan."
Mhm.
And at the time, my husband was still working, and I'm not licensed in any of those states. That's easy enough to take care of. But, and then, uh, uh, I was no longer working a steady, I was no longer an employee anywhere. All of my work right now is contract except for Haymarket. So I said, I want to do this retreat. The boss said, give me your perspectives on it. Um, and Haymarket fully sponsored four of them while at the same time finding federal funding for it.
Wow. If any of you are looking for a capstone, there's the place to look to see what a difference you can make in the
Yep.
lives of lots of people in one spot.
So what? So at that point, I did go in after my first week of work, and I said, number one, I'm basically working 8 hours a week, and you're paying me for this many, and you're paying me at this rate. We need to renegotiate the salary. And he looks at me and he goes, no. And I said, okay, you realize you're paying me this much money for this much work. And he goes, um, he goes, you'll make it up. and and I love this man. I have such great respect for him. His belief is that if you have to take care of a healthy community starts by taking care of your responding community.
Mm-hmm.
And so in August 2022, we held our first retreat. Um, uh, Embassy Suites Hilton Corporation has a huge support for first responders, and Embassy Suites has gone out of their way to accommodate us with our retreat. So what our
Wow.
retreat is it's an intensive 4 days of peer support and support. Um, it's always on my LinkedIn if you want to look me up on LinkedIn. Um, and it has three parts to it. Um, one is uh, education on the responder culture, although because everybody who attends is a responder, they know the culture. But what we talk about is what are the elements of the culture that are so traumatic, and why your personality is different. Um, Number two, we break down into small groups that have a peer supporter and a mental health support, and they're sort of parallel to uh, critical incident debriefing. And the third part is really focused on resources and intervention. And we always have volunteers who are willing to demonstrate EMDR.
Wow.
Yeah. And so all of the peers and mental health people are volunteers. And in June, we're doing our 10th
I didn't
one.
realize you'd gotten all the way up to 10. That's incredible.
Mm-hmm. And at first, my boss wanted one done every month. And I said, until we can work in salary to hire people, I can't ask I can't ask my mental health people unless they're retired to log on to not work 4 days one time a month. I'm sorry, I have a fruit fly or something. Um, so what I try to do if you're a mental health worker who is offering support at the retreat is we have a very a schedule that we strictly stick by. First responders love schedules. They
They do.
love schedules.
Hmm.
And so that so that our mental health people know when we don't need them,
So they can
and
work.
so they can work. Everybody is housed in their own room. Uh, we provide all of the meals, and we start the group together at 8 a.m. and we end between 7:30 and 8 p.m. We do have some breaks that are built in, but we eat together dinner too and lunch. Um, and you see the first night people so Sunday we start on a Sunday and we go to Wednesday. And that was mostly a practical thing in that those are the cheapest days at the hotel, right? Um, Haymarket funds everything, the parking, the meals, the hotel room, the snacks, everything.
Wow.
We have someone who just started coming who works for an airline, and he has donated his companion tickets.
To get
So,
people there. Wow.
mhm. So he came and he loved it so much. He said, "I will help anybody from anywhere that my airline flies to and from if they can get themselves to the airport." Um, so we have uh, the day starts on Sunday
Hmm.
at noon, and the the caveat is that you have to be willing to tell your story, and you have to pick one major focus, and that's mostly to keep you focused while you're there
Hmm.
and to help us know as we segment off the groups which are
Where
the
you
best.
go.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, a good example is that every now and then we get uh, tactical SWAT teams who've had a line of duty while serving warrants. Well, they're very different than our hospital personnel with
Hmm.
what they're talking about. They do great in the big groups together because there's generalities that overlap a great deal, which is wonderful because then they feel supported not only specifically but in general. Um, One of our returning DMORT nurses has started to bring her emotional support dog. Holy cow! That
Nice.
um, we keep the group very small. I think our largest one was 22 participants. And I personally did not like that because I couldn't get a flavor of every person in the room. And as mental health, you like to have your temperature, you like to know the temperature of what
The
everybody
entire
is
room.
doing. Yeah.
Hmm.
And while all of the mental health people and the peer supporters that we get are extraordinary, and they're doing that, and you see them, looping back when we do our hot washes. I've got so and so and so and so, and I'm watching so and so, etc. But International Critical Incident Stress Foundation donates one of their people who is military and law enforcement, and his wife is a death doula. Her company is Positive Passings, and she's on the East Coast. I may have introduced you, Nicole. Uh,
Yes. Hmm.
Amazing, just an amazing person. Um, but And then this actually started as sort of a brainstorm with the Virginia Peer Support Association. And one of their troopers, who's a psychologist, said, you know, we should be doing this as a 3-day thing. And then he invited Roger Solomon from the EMDR Institute to join. And our first one was in Virginia, and Jeff Mitchell came. And uh, Jeff and Roger, interestingly enough, um, were the first part of the first authors of the North American Volunteer Association, which grew into or with the Green Cross traumatology. But if your students want to look at the North American Volunteer Association, that website is extraordinary. And as I said, they handle uh, uh, spontaneous volunteers. But they wrote, Solomon and Mitchell were two of the psychologists who generated the North American Volunteer um, agreement, so that like um, anybody who was sort of a member of the Green Cross, this was the agreement that a volunteer would have to understand that they're functioning under. So that website has some incredible free resources that are there. But and we started the first one was done at Roslin Center in Richmond. As a matter of fact, we have one in June 10 and 11. I'll be there with Byron and Vapsa, and I think Roger is teleporting in, or if you know Roger, teleporting is a word that works for Roger. For Roger, he's like this bohemian gypsy. He's all you never know where you're talking to him from.
In Captain Kirk. Yeah.
Yeah. And but we took that model here in Illinois and expanded it to focus and to target on educating preventatively about understanding about the cost of your culture, and then recognizing somatically what it's doing with your body and in all of the areas of your functioning.
Which
And
is
so,
hugely important.
yeah, so we do deep breathing, we do meditation, we do movement. If you're familiar with capacity, let me write Capacitar International, which is Patricia Kane. I think it's Cane, but it could be Kane. She does nonverbal trauma intervention at displaced peoples camps and places throughout the world.
Wow.
And her website is extraordinary. And they've gotten, in the last 10 years, their YouTubes are extraordinary. She has a whole YouTube channel. And capacitar means to empower. And it's done, and she uses yoga, Tai Chi, uh, um, tapping, somatic release. And she has something called emergency packets that you can download for free in about 35 different languages with pictures.
Wow. All right. I will be tapping into those. I appreciate that. And all of you should be too.
It's a really extraordinary resource. And especially if you're working with law enforcement and you're working with high performance medical people, I would also say, who spend a lot of time doing martial arts, and they tend to be that very overly disciplined type A. You want to be doing somatic stuff because most of them are doing martial arts anyway, and you want to bring them into center with the breath and the movement and the spending of cortisol
Mm.
and the metabolism of lactic acid. So capacitar does a really nice job with that, as does Lorne Christensen, Christian or Son, I'm not sure. And he wrote this great book called Meditation for Warriors. And it's meta meditation for warriors. And he actually co-wrote On Combat with Dave Grossman.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
so all of you guys should know Dave Grossman's work, as
Mhm.
well as Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. Um, oh, and another really great author, and I think she's out there with you guys, is Ellen Kirschman.
Yes.
And Joel Fay, and there's a Mark Kamina maybe, wrote a whole series, but I love a cop, I love a firefighter, et
Hmm.
cetera, and so on. But once you get into that series of books, it really does teach you about what it means to have a culture in the home.
Hmm.
Stoning the keepers at the gate is another great one, especially uh, overlapping with spiritual moral injury, um,
Hmm.
and bullets in the washing machine. I just saw that APA has a 14-hour class on religious trauma.
Do they
And
really now?
yeah, I just saw it posted. Um, and it is about people who've been traumatized through their religion. And I know that that may seem like, what does that have to do with this topic? It has everything to do with it.
It does. Terry McDaniel also has a retreat, a 2-day conference for that,
Oh, that's awesome.
for grief and religious trauma.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Terry, Terry
Terry
McDonald.
McDaniel, she is truly from an atheistic perspective, agnostic perspective, but she brings in people from all walks. But yeah, religious trauma has everything to do with all of this.
And you find, and I think it goes back to many of the individuals who subsequently end up with significant amounts of moral trauma and moral injury,
Hmm.
where I believed so much in something that I gave so much, and then you find out that you're not welcome in your church, or there's predators in your church, and it's really hard to divorce all that out. And
Hmm.
so when you understand that overlapping with the culture, you know, here in Chicago, for example, very very tightly Catholic community of
Hmm.
first responders.
Hmm.
And if you don't understand the overlap with some of the culture, the trauma related to the Catholic Church right now, it's very hard sometimes
There's a
to have a
huge
conversation.
conflict. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Hmm.
excuse me.
And
So anyway,
the other piece of that is there are people who come back from some of these mass traumas, as well as um, folks who are in law enforcement, who
mhm,
walk in expecting support within their spiritual community
yep,
and find the exact opposite,
yep,
right?
yep, absolutely.
The folks who came
And
back from COVID, who heard in church that they were wrong and everything they experienced wasn't real.
yeah, yeah,
What are you supposed to do with that?
right, right.
Mhm.
Um, and it's so interesting. I have a nurse who has been to our retreat, and she actually had reached out during COVID. She had had her first baby right before COVID really hit. And interestingly, just so you know geographically where I am, the first index patient for COVID was diagnosed at the hospital 8 miles north of here
Oh, I had no
in
idea.
in our community. And when it came out, there were my department is 65 people in my PD. There were about 18 or 19 of us who thought we had all picked up bronchitis from each other. And it turns out that we all may have been um, exposed to this individual because some of the involvement in the area that we crossed paths with. So
Mhm.
actually, when I went out to Travis City, one of Travis Air Force Base, one of the first reasons that I went out there was like, oh hell yeah, I need to be in the sunshine, in the warmth, and absorb some vitamin D because I cannot kick this bronchitis. And uh, so I was sleeping 4 to 6 hours every afternoon when we got back from. I had the morning shift 6 till 2, and 8 weeks of that, and I came back so much healthier. But probably one of the few people who can say I came back from deployment healthier than when I left. So, but there's no special shirt for that. But
I was grateful
um,
Stacy was gone because I had COVID while she was away.
oh
And
my
the
God,
commander was like, "Are you sure you shouldn't go home?" I'm like, "No, keep her there.
yeah,
Why would you send her back to be exposed to me?"
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So the day after I got home from uh, I think Travis City. So I'm trying to remember when we went into full lockdown. It must
April.
have been April. Uh, I got home, and 2 or 3 days later, we went into full lockdown. And
Mhm.
I was still on quarantine. And so I think I was so excited. Oh, good, I don't have to leave my house. But I'm an introvert, so that's always like, oh, I don't have to go out today. The wind is blowing in the wrong direction. Oh, yeah, I can't go out there. So I totally derailed from where I was going with my stupid jokes. But uh, yeah. So the so my lovely friend just had her baby, and the hospital turned an entire floor into a COVID unit because it just blew up. And she was an ICU nurse, so she was assigned up there. So she had to make that incredibly, terribly hard decision. Do I continue to nurse my infant, or do I express, or do I move my infant to formula? Now, we all right away, if you're a mom, you're probably already going, oh, I know exactly what I would do. Excellent. If you know what you're going to do, God bless you. But as we all know, because we work in the field, that's not my call.
Right.
That is not my call. And the harassment that this poor woman got, there was no good answer.
Mm-mm.
She went to her physician, and with her physician, she and her physician made a very difficult decision. And she asked me repeatedly, did I make the right decision? And I'm like, there is no right decision here. There is no right decision.
This
Um,
is an experience we've never had.
so the worst part was, as COVID went on, that she came in to the nursing station, to the lounge area, and on the refrigerator was a note taped that said, "You fucking think that you can take time off? Time off is a luxury to take care of your baby." And all of her expressed milk was all over the floor. They had just thrown all of her plastic bags all over the floor. And they said, the note went on, said, do you think you're so special that you can take time off the floor and make us pick up your your slack? Now keep in mind, I'm going to go back to the smoking thing, and I promise you, if you smoke, your decision, I don't care either way. But what I do care about, after being in a hospital for 40 years, that here's how smoking breaks go in many hospitals, or at least hospitals I've been at. I'm on floor 3. I'm going to go down to floor 2, pick up my friend. Then we're going to go over across, get our other friend, go down to floor 1. And then we're going to walk to the smoking area and smoking break starts. Now we're going to go back and we're going to bring all,
That's a different way. Morticians, it's I've injected the body. I'm going to go out and have a smoke while it sets up and go right back in.
yeah, no, no. And I mean, I watched that for 40 years at hospitals. And, it's like, I'm going out for a smoke break. You don't smoke, you know?
Yeah.
So, so she said she would watch her colleagues take their smoke breaks that they were entitled to.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I never once complained about go take your break, go
Them.
take your break.
Right.
And she said what they didn't realize in doing that, not only was it heartbreaking to her and she felt targeted and harassed, but she didn't know who they were. And everybody acted as sweet as pie, and everybody acted as, oh my God, somebody did what to you? Somebody did this to you? So that was hard for her. But the worst part was what she said was, we were working 12-hour shifts, which always went over, and she said what they didn't realize was that was 3 days of formula. I mean, that was 3 days of food
Food.
for my baby. I am now behind the 8 ball and now have to um, uh, uh, move my baby right from breast milk to full formula, which usually people transition to over
Full
time.
stop. Mm-hmm.
And she just sat there and she cried and she said, what did I do to them that made them hate me so much? And,
Yep.
at that point we were sitting in my living room and I was, I'd made a nice little tea thing, and I said, I'm going over and I'm getting the whiskey. I'm like, this deserves whiskey. And she's like, I don't drink. And I said, yeah, I really don't either, but let's not let that stop us. That's like one of the
Today.
worst things I've ever heard, you know.
Right.
And and those are really little things. And if you're associated with a hospital, the hostile workplace environment that can happen in hospitals, especially with nursing at now. And I think nursing is really
Under
under
siege.
under siege. And
Mm-hmm.
and I've heard such horror stories. I I think in August our retreat is going to have probably 50% is going to be nursing and medical people um,
Mm-hmm.
coming out of some of the hospital experiences lately. And yeah, it's been really something. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, but
The
yeah,
grief over what was their profession and is no longer like their profession.
yeah.
Mhm.
So, people putting um, filling up surgical gloves with hot water and putting it under people's hands so that they have a sense that they're being touched by another human, or
Mm-hmm.
nursing the personnel staying. And it's like, I don't want him to die alone.
Right.
And one of the other things that I heard so much was holding the iPads and holding the person's hands while they were saying goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
And
I heard that's as a grief therapist, I hear it frequently. And the
yeah,
families sitting in the parking lot in the car watching
yep,
on their iPad.
yep.
Mm-hmm.
And the number of families who didn't get to say goodbye. My sister, who at some point I would love for you to meet, she is a nurse and she does infectious disease at a nursing facility. And they lost both of her in-laws within the same year. And he died in the nursing home that she was at, and she was never allowed to be on that floor, even as the infectious control nurse. So she never, no, they never got to say goodbye to him. Never got to say goodbye to him.
Unwitnessed deaths are very hard and they can rapidly lead to complicated grief unless there's an
Yep,
intervention like right now.
yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And and I know that that is something that she has so carried. I should have just taken the risk of, um, you know, uh, being disciplined. Uh, I was the infectious control nurse. Why couldn't I be down there? You know,
Right.
so, but and for my police department, I wasn't allowed to be in the car with my officers. They weren't allowed to come into the department except to do their paperwork. So they did their roll calls in the parking lot, and they had to
Mhm.
spend all 12 hours of their shift in their car, except if they were coming in to do paperwork and go to the bathroom. And so I would get in my car and I'd drive around looking for them to do time with them, and the
Mhm.
loneliness. And the problem was people were now calling police departments. This isn't just endemic in the department, in my department, but where that was one of the common practices. And the community members were calling the departments complaining because you had an officer standing car to car talking to another police officer, and why aren't they out there doing their job, without understanding that, number one, they all have these in Illinois now, they all have their video cameras which film everything.
Everything.
And in the car, everything is getting filmed. So you got both ways. And you can't talk on the radio because it's an open air radio. So you don't know who's monitoring. And you can't be texting,
Right.
right? And so people are calling, going like, what are we paying you guys for? You're standing around doing nothing. So now the chief is calling the commander, who's calling the sergeant, saying, hey, whoever is in, who's ever in Bravo 5, you guys need to get moving. But
Every profession needs to have its support within itself.
yeah, yeah,
You have to have that.
yeah.
And especially the first responders and the last responders. They're their own community and
Hmm.
their own support.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
during COVID, having to be on the job while your family member is in the hospital,
Right.
and going to the hospital, transporting someone to a hospital, knowing that you can't go up and see your family member.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then coming home and not being able to be near your family members at home
Hmm.
because you may expose them to something.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So, and just recently, for one of the for through Mike Fagel, I wrote a book with not a book, a chapter in a disaster planning book for disaster planning, working with veterinary husbandry people and the trauma that they experienced with laboratory animals and having to call whole herds of animals, um, and the amount of research animals that they were going through.
Had to
and
sacrifice. Mm.
and researchers don't have the same relationship as do the animal husbandry and care and veterinary teams. And that chapter was so hard to write. There were parts of it I'm like, I can't do this alone.
I
You're
can't
gonna have to.
imagine that. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the number of times that, in a mass disaster, where they actually bring sleeping bags in and have to stay in a lab with their animals,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. So there are so many ways, and so many different cultures that you can know. But I think that, and you're probably already really echoing this point, which is the question, what is this moment like for you? And what are the hard parts here for you? Or what are the struggles that you're having?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and seeing it through their lens. I mean, that very Adlerian perspective of trying to understand something through someone else's lens. As terrible as New York was, and it was terrible, the hardest part was, um, so that was May, that my mother and my brother died in September. So we're
Remember.
talking 6 months, like actually shorter than 6 months, like
Mm-hmm.
5 months or so. But my mom was getting ill, was becoming very, very ill, which was very much dysregulating my brother. And my brother would call and go, "Oh my God, mom is, whatever." And then my sister, the voice of reason, would call and say, "Mom's really struggling. And she's very upset with you being in New York." And um, so I remember one day where I decided to actually call my mom and talk to her. Now, my mom was pretty deaf and did not always wear her
Hearing aid.
hearing aid. So I'm on the dock in New York, um, loading dock, not like the dock with the boat. We were on a dock with the boats, but we were inside the
Mm-hmm.
loading dock. And I'm trying to talk to my mom. And my mom says, "Are you, yeah, I just need to know that you're okay because all the ladies at church are praying for you, blah, 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 blah." And I have to show you the picture if I'm going to see if I can do this. I'm going to pull up the picture and uh, share here. And see if I can find you again. Here we go. Here's me. Zoom. Let's go back out. Um, oh, and I have one other big kind of traumatic thing to keep in mind. Um, Come on, where are you? Um, she was my ladies in church and the quilting group want to know that you're okay. And so I said, okay, um, okay, mom, let me put on the camera here so you can see I'm doing fine. So I sent her the
There you
picture.
are.
Okay. Now for Mike Fagel's book, he asked me for a picture for my bio,
There
and
you go.
I sent him this one. It's on the frickin' cover.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, "Did you want no one but my mom to buy the book or your mom?" And he goes, "No, I put it on the cover because this is the 1,000-mile stare.
Mm-hmm.
If you can get past my COVID eyebrows, that's the 1,000-mile stare."
It is.
And
It
my mom,
absolutely is.
thank God, her vision was probably not very good. Um, Probably, she went, "Oh, good, I can see that you're okay." And what I should have sent her was this picture, if you can see that. Oops.
It's on. You do it on a share screen.
Yeah, screen sharing, new share. Can you see that?
There we go. Yes. Yep.
Now, that's a little
That's the
bit better.
doc.
That's the loading dock, and each one of those had um a between you know what, I was wrong before, somewhere between 45 and 50 bodies per.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the dock that Stacy and I worked on. But I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
out in the sun, I'm squinting because of the sun,
You
but
don't have all your gear on.
don't have all my gear on. And this was day one where actually that look is like, what the fuck have I gotten myself into? And I hope I didn't just
Mm-hmm.
offend anybody. But I didn't send that picture. I sent her the other one. The the uh one I will share because I think that this is an important one for 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 people. Let's go to Haymarket here. Um, Sorry. No.
It's all right. It takes a bit to find pictures sometimes. My computer has something like 10,000 of them in it.
Yeah. And you know what?
And
I photograph all the time at work. Um, and for my guys. I'm constantly
Mm-hmm.
Zoom. Okay. Share screen. So this is part of the psychoeducation that I do. I just wanted to share, a friend of mine drew these mandalas.
Those are beautiful.
Yeah, and if anybody wants a copy of that, I'm happy to send it to you. Her name's Gail Alexander, and they're all done with uh, oil pencil. And the one on top is for law enforcement. The one in the middle is dispatch, the gold line between, and then the lower left is fire.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is for protection for all responders and personnel. She also did draw one for us from uh, Travis Air Force Base. So I always show this one
Mm-hmm.
with my, that's my patchboard, and I have outgrown it and putting together another couple ones, but there's my DMORT team. And this is the one with the American flag, is actually a really historic place. Uh, because that hangar is where, during the Vietnam War, all of the deceased were brought home before being and
Prepared.
being processed and then being sent to their homes. And this is where we did the repatriation of the Diamond Princess people.
Mm-hmm.
We were told we were not allowed to photograph any of that, but if we happened to photograph ourselves, we could do selfies. So almost all of us have a picture of us doing selfies with the plane in the background.
Mm-hmm.
This is our DMORT team, the lower corner here, bringing a body up to the dock from
Mm-hmm.
the hospital. I'm just trying to find.
Yeah, nobody on the teams are allowed to take pictures, so you have to find them that the feds have actually allowed out. 'Cause there's so
Um,
few of them.
oh, I figured, fuck it. If you're not going to get me my chairs, I'm going to pull my camera out and see if that brings somebody
The
running.
team in Hawaii took a picture at the end of theirs when they had, I think it was the head of Health and Human Services there, and they were not allowed to keep the picture because they smiled in it.
Jesus Christ.
I thought that was
Sorry.
bad press. They're allowed, you gotta have, when you're working with people who are in trauma and doing trauma, you gotta have some smiles, right?
So yes, this is the mental health support that I was able to offer on the dock. This was one of the few things that wasn't painted over.
I am glad they let you keep that there.
I would have written over it.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, if they had come to me, I would have said, where's my fucking chairs?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
In each of
I'm
the
sorry.
operations that the national disaster teams go out on, they create challenge coins. So
Yep,
Kammie had a picture of a challenge coin there. And
yep.
so the folks who are responding do have challenge coins that show
I'm
their
trying,
time
yeah.
there.
And in my patch board, actually, I have a whole bucket of them at this point. I believe that one of the members of your class actually trades toilet papers and brings me challenge coins with the stories that are with it. She's one of my best, dearest friends. There we go. I'm trying to find. Um, I have a picture, and just want to share this because I think I can speak for Stacy as I say this.
Mhm.
So the top photo was our team picture the night of the Diamond Princess repatriation when the jet came in. And there are about 8 versions of the top photo because we were all cycling in and out to make sure we could get as many people into the photo as we possibly could. So you'll
Mhm.
notice there's me. I'm like all happy, like I get to be with the big kids. Here is us. Here's New York. Okay, and just for a point of reference,
All we're seeing right now is the 2024 master retreat.
oh, then I got
It's
to screen
it's
share. Sorry. Escape.
it's showing that it's photos, but it's a photo file.
Okay, so I got to start this over here. Hopefully this will share. How about that?
There we go. Yep.
Okay. So on top, as I said, there are about 7 or 8 iterations so that we all could get in there.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom, just for point of reference, you can see the green kind of screen that's upright, separates the receiving part and then the active admin part. So starting at the bottom picture on the far right, there is the comfort tent where you could walk into this is the receiving tent and then the identification tents. So, and then this picture was taken from the platform where Stacy and I worked.
Mm-hmm.
I just want you to scan through there, and what you won't see is Stacy,
Mm-mm.
and you won't see Kammie
Mm-mm.
because our team leader, who is in the fucking picture, said you work until 7 p.m. You do not leave the loading dock until 7 p.m. This was taken at 6:30.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know it sounds really petty, but to me, that's moral injury. That to me is so moral injury.
It absolutely is. And
And
those are
we
the
were
things that hit
we were
home.
we were clearly told we are not a member of this team.
Mm-hmm.
But let me tell you, the individual who'd sneak off to go gamble every night,
It's in
the
there.
group that went out drinking. Oh, and the person who slept with I'm sorry, I shouldn't say this because it'll be slander. Let's just say we think that she and or he or whoever had a lot of different hookups with different members of different teams.
He's in there.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
who didn't even come to their shift most days is in
While
there.
you while you guys were doing 12s. Mm-hmm.
145 bodies. I think that was our Stacy may remember the count. I remember our average was about 132, but I think there was one day.
Yeah. She was just worn out when she got home.
Yeah, it
She
was
always is.
physically and it just exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And uh I was not fine.
Mm-mm.
See if I can go back to I want to get to view here. Um the challenge coin thing. Um yeah, so for me that was like that. If that is what's going to get, that sort of stuff really gets me, is the I'm supposed to be part of a team but we're not functioning like a team.
Right.
You told me, if you were on my team, you told me you needed a chair, I would find you a chair. If you were a civilian, of course I would find you a chair. So the 3 rows on the bottom are different challenge coins from different things. The top row are students of mine who are now in the FBI. The big blue one there, my daughter is a federal, works for the Department of Justice. That's the federal uh, federal task force on the opioid epidemic. And then you have mine from Bartlett, Travis City, the New York one, the MDNS. Then I did the G8 here in Chicago, and then Bartlett. And right below on the far right, on the second shelf, are my dad's West Point coins.
My
So
goodness.
I have my dad's coins, and I have my daughter's coins, and I have my coins, and then I have a coin of my husband's who made the case for me. But
That's
I have
awesome.
students who are now friends. I have my department, Bartlett, up there, my SWAT team. My SWAT team used to joke they were the only team who had their own grandma. So in any
Who
picture
went
with,
out with them?
yeah, and so any pictures that I'm on, they always put me in the middle. So it's quite a place of honor. And some of them I have their military coins and different men and women I've served with.
And
So
that
I'm
tells you
really,
you're a part of the team.
yeah.
Hmm.
So for me, relationships are everything. And I think
Right.
that you know, when we talk about the people who are taking this class, that's what this is about. How do I be a part of something that is maybe not necessarily mine, but a part of it will become
Hmm.
mine.
And how do I understand their culture and understand their needs and understand how to ask them about it?
Yeah. So we are
And that,
putting together a series of classes that will teach culture about culture, and it's going to be co-taught with hopefully with this officer from Schaumburg, the police psychology section, and then disaster will be Mike Fagel, who's almost all of the bottom there from the feds, um, and then we'll have the immersion practicum, which will involve 40 hours of immersion at one of the retreats.
that's an incredible opportunity.
Yeah.
Folks, I hope you're listening. Hmm.
So yeah, um, and the other I I think that there I'm not I'm not about getting a certificate. So like you'll get a completion for taking the
Hmm.
class, but you're not going to get a certification. I mean, excuse me, there are agencies out there that give first responder
Hmm.
certifications, and uh, there I don't know anything. I couldn't say yes, and I couldn't say no. I just I think that there's a lot that many of these certifications don't address, which is the NIMS and the CIS stuff, the CISM stuff, and the laws. Like
Right.
many people don't understand the hiring and selection process that's federally mandated
Hmm.
for law enforcement and fire.
Hmm.
You know, California Post is the one, the peace officers standards and
Standards and
training
training. Hmm.
leads the country. And most people don't understand that most first responders are not hired by their department directly unless they're home rule, which is it's so small that like we'll hire you. But most fire people, um, uh, fire is very complicated to understand the mechanisms behind their organization because their equipment is so expensive. They often will do those protection districts where they all chip in and have access to the
Hmm.
big equipment.
Right.
But for law enforcement and fire, the reason that police departments can't hire their own personnel is that because of the Constitution, that all personnel are actually have to be hired by civilian boards because we are a nation governed by citizens. We're not a police nation.
Hmm.
So when people say, oh, we should have a federal police department, we can't
Right.
because of the Constitution.
Hmm.
There are federal agencies that function with specific tasks,
Hmm.
but all all
But they
laws
all
start
respond to the
central.
locals. Hmm.
Yeah, all
Hmm.
all laws start local.
Hmm.
And what's local here in Hanover Park may not be legal in Elgin.
Hmm. Or out here in Riverside.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it's very like and to be honest with you, many Americans don't understand the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all of those sort of things. So there I know when I taught ethics, I included this as a section, and we will be talking about this in the psychology of law enforcement and the underpinnings of mass disaster, emergency management response and personnel because there there's a lot that civilians don't understand, and surprise surprise TV doesn't always get it right. So
Imagine that.
I know. I know. I was yelling at the TV the other night. We were watching The Rookie, which is a show we like here in my house. And it was like I kept saying, she's not a psychiatrist, she's a psychologist, and she's really bad, and you're not allowed to tape. And my husband was
And you
like,
can't
okay,
sleep with your client either. Stop it.
yeah, yeah. And you cannot buy them drinks, and blah, blah, blah. And then you find out she was bad anyway. So, it's so, yeah. And,
That's why I stick with
and
HGTV.
yeah. And the sergeant is not going to be involved in all of that, in all of those departments at the same time. So,
Mm-mm.
but
Mm-mm.
it's, yeah. So, um, they're your best teachers. And if you have not done a ride along, go on your local um, police department's website, village website, and sign up to do a ride along. And if you
Mm-hmm.
want help coming up with questions to ask, shoot me an email. I'll send you the list or if I can find the list, I'll send it to you so that you can distribute it. But go and ask questions, open-ended questions.
Get
Why do
to
you
know
want to do
them.
a ride along? I'd like to understand what this job is about, and I'd like to understand what you face every day, and I'd like to understand how you think about it, and I'd like to understand um, what is a big deal for you.
Mm-hmm. I'd
If
like
you
to have a
want a
better
great,
connection with my local agency.
yeah, if you want a great question, tell me about the funniest thing that ever surprised you. And you will hear some stories that will really give you some insight into, I know I shouldn't be laughing, but that's kind of funny, you
Right.
know, all the way to, weren't you scared? And they were like, yeah, but it was funny. Or, they're used to the question, what was the worst thing you've ever seen? You
They
know,
don't need to see that. They don't need to hear that again.
yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Mm-hmm.
how do you talk to your children? How do you go to your neighborhood picnic?
Mm-hmm. How do you let your kids go out and do stuff and not, right?
When my daughter went on her internship, she came home and she's okay. In my mind, my daughter is still 6 years old. Okay. And little blonde girl. And she came home and said, I want to go in law enforcement. And I said, no. She said, Mom, I don't live here anymore. And I said, that's 2 weeks in your room. She goes, I don't live here. And like, you keep this up, wait till your dad gets home. And so she did. She went into law enforcement and she did a couple of ride alongs in my department. And I knew the guys were going to be very they're always respectful, but I knew that they were going to be respectful, but I also knew that they were going to be honest. And she came home and said, I don't want to do municipal law enforcement. I don't have the personality. There's no way I could be as polite as they were. And especially with the one officer she was with, I was like, you thought so and so was polite? She goes, yeah, he was really nice, but he's a lot like dad. And I'm like, okay, because he's very, very brusque. And she went on her internship with Health and Human Services, and they worked as the analog team with the FBI doing medical insurance fraud. So, okay, number one, if you are billing on a platform, do not upbill because the Justice Department can access, if you are charging for your 60 minutes and you're getting off at 43 minutes, there's a fine every time you do that. And it
Yes,
starts
there
at
is.
250,000. And let me tell you, my daughter's words were, Mom, sometimes low hanging fruit is how you pay the bills. Okay, don't
Yep.
ever tell her I told you that though, because she'll say, Mom, you can't be saying things like that. Um, but she worked a case that was very well known here in Chicago in the round 2000 that involved a pyramid scheme with a medication that ended up killing a lot of homeless people
Oh,
because it caused blood disorder, blood marrow, bone marrow loss. And it was, and out of that case came a lot of the legislation where pharmaceutical companies can no longer give bonuses for prescribing meds. So like some really good things came out of that. But now flash forward 15 years, they're still going after some of these doctors in the very vulnerable populations. And she came home from work one day and she said, so I was sitting in the back of the squad car, um, putting on a wire for this man who I thought they had sent him to jail and were pumping sunlight into him a couple hours a day. And he was sitting there talking about how nice it was to be a good guy. And I'm sitting here with my hands with a piece of tape on his naked chest, putting this wire on. And I was like, you are never to be in the back of the squad car ever again. And
No.
you are never to have your hands on somebody who should be in prison. And I don't want you to know that these bad things happen. And she just looked at me and she's like, do you want me to go to my room? And I'm like, go to your room.
2 weeks. 2
And
weeks right now.
yeah, and I know what she hears and the what she hears as a result of her job, the testimony in court, some of the big cases that her department has worked on, and I don't want people to know about that. Ironically, though, I'm awfully pissed off that people don't know about that too,
Mm-hmm.
because if you understood why we were doing what we were doing, you would shut the hell up and just let me be on my airplane seat drinking my ginger ale.
Right. Right.
And not give a shit about having a mask on.
Mm-hmm.
But
Or
go
heavy
ahead.
boots.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and live in your pretty little world that COVID doesn't exist. Go right ahead.
Mm-hmm. And bad things don't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hawaiian fire didn't happen. It was all made up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, you live in
And
a new world. And that is something that all of you are going to be dealing with is everybody responding to these things also now faces folks who are creating paranoia and questioning absolutely everything.
yep.
I can't tell you how
And
many times I've had people say that didn't really happen. If there were morgue trucks, I want pictures of inside the morgue trucks.
I got them. Come on by.
Gross. You're not allowed. That's private. Can't have it. They
Yep.
were actually using some kind of salt gun to shoot down um, drones in Hawaii that were trying to get pictures inside the morgue tents.
Yep. Yep.
Why do you need to do that? Leave them alone. Their day is
Right.
hard enough.
Right.
Their
Okay.
day is hard enough.
With all of the funding deficits that we have in this world, do you really think that we're going to fund fake dead bodies?
And
Oh,
fake
okay.
burned cities.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I can tell you this though, one amazing thing for our DMORT workers, different than our in some of our VIC, we tend to work side by side. But in New York, there were 4 disaster portable units. New York asked for federal support. And what they did over time was they collapsed them all down to um, Pier 39 is where we were. And they're all collapsed onto Pier 39 with a 1,000-year lease. And so you had the short term um, in identification verified, and then held short term to be released for burial or released for burial at Hatteras Island. And then you had the long term storage, which I don't know what that was, either holding for identification, holding for court cases, whatever. But those were the freezer. Um, very different. I actually preferred working over there on days I couldn't work with Stacy, um, because I was the only one there, so I did everything myself. And there was a whole row of the the toilet trailers. So I got some peace of mind over there. All of a sudden, like you all of a sudden figure out how important your ADLs are to you and
Right?
your privacy. So
Uh-huh.
I was like, let Stacy and I go over there. And our team
Right.
lead was like, no, one of you has to stay. And then we would be like, because she was just such my backbone. But the day that they were closing out one of the morgues, they brought over a truck from the coroner's office that had 10, every soul in there was 10 years and younger. And when I saw those Army guys, and we worked with two groups from the National Guard, both were 10th Mountain, which is based in just north of West Point at Fort Drum. And I was told they don't know why they call it Fifth Mountain, because there is no Fifth Mountain and they don't operate in the mountains. So whatever. But if you ever meet a 10th Mountain guy, you say to them, climb high, and they will respond to the top. So
All
that's
right, got
how
it.
you get to be, you got to know the lingo. So we had one group that was from upstate New York, and many of these kids were community college kids or working in a bar. And, they had never been out of upstate New York except maybe for spring break. The other group was 10th Mountain Reserves, and they were NYPD, NYFD, and they had actually been in country deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. So these guys were hardened to what they saw. And when we saw their faces go blank, they just went pale when that truck got open. And you could see that, like, for them, that moment of, I'm going to have to go put my hands, and you just saw their wall of, I can't do this. And to see the DMORT people, and I think Stacy was one of them who took lead, and she walked past the guy who was in charge, who was just this, he gave us such shit, but he loved us. And she put her hand on his shoulder and she said something like, stand down. We got this for you. And we went in and cleared that truck. And, um, the guy came over and he was like, I should be able to do this. And I'm like, you could do it if you had to, but right now you don't have to. It is our honor and our privilege, please. And I said, as a matter of fact, why don't you guys not even watch? It's okay. You don't have to watch. And they stood there at attention for the DMORT people.
Wow. No, I had not heard a word about that. And that tells you
Mm-hmm.
everything, because DMORT people don't talk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so, one of the younger guys from the Northern team was like, why was that okay for you to do? Like, why? And I said, number one, if it's a child, you got to keep in mind it will always be the stuff that gets to your heartstrings. Number two, this is what these people do, is they honor the deceased um, in all phases of passing.
Mm-hmm.
And they make sure, like, most Americans don't know that from the moment that a deceased body is recovered, that they are never left unattended until
Mm-mm.
they are handed back to their family.
Right.
There's always somebody there standing over them,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I made a point of, whenever we were moving bodies, especially with the younger reservist, I would say, so, Mr., and I'd look at the tag and I'd go, Mr. So-and-so, it is our honor and privilege to help you with this part of your journey today. And I bid you so much peace in whatever is next for you. And just know that we are treating you with respect, and it's our privilege to be here with you. And one of the guys was like, do you always talk to the dead? And I'm like, no, but now seemed to be like a good time to start. And he would laugh, go, I love you. You're inspirational. And I said, well, thank you. That just makes my whole day. So let's go be inspirational for the rest of them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Kammie,
Yeah.
thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And
You're
I know
welcome.
everyone else does too. I'm gonna hit the stop recording now. And the rest of the assignments are in the coursework material, folks.
It was my privilege. If you want, reach out to me.
Thanks.
Yeah.